So there are really two reasons why we do any behavior, two orientations that fundamentally underlie every single behavior that we do. Think about something that you've done today. Any behavior from getting out of bed to making your breakfast to even talking to someone that you spoke to at work or at school or wherever you were today. Every behavior that we do is either done because we are trying to move towards something that is important or something that we want, or to move us away from something that we don't want, to move us away from something that is uncomfortable or undesirable in some way. Even something as simple as brushing our teeth. We can do that because we want to move towards having good dental hygiene and having very white teeth, or we can do that because we want to avoid decay and disease or even avoid pain of toothache. The point is, every behavior can have one of these two orientations or sometimes a combination of both. Importantly though, the two are not equal when it comes to their effect on our life, and that's what I want to talk about today. So I've got a little story. So imagine that you are walking through a field one day, and in the distance you see your favorite fruit growing on a tree or a vine. Imagine that someone comes up next to you and says, "Hey, what do you want to do right now? What do you want right now?" Most likely, if there's nothing else there, you'll probably say, "I want to move towards the fruit tree. I want to go and get some fruit." There's the towards move. In a completely different scenario now, imagine that you are still going through a field, but that you have fallen into a pit. Imagine you've fallen into a well of water and you're treading water and it's quite deep, and that same person now comes next to you. This is a different scenario. Person comes next to you and says, "Hey, what would you like right now?" Pretty sure that in that moment you're not going to say, I'd like some fruit. Most of the time, most people are going to say, "I want a rope or something to get me out of this well. Get me out of this well." And it makes complete sense to do that. Getting out of wells makes complete sense to be prioritized over moving towards a fruit tree at that particular time. So what does this highlight? Well, what it highlights is that the mind tends to override towards moves in the presence of threats. In other words, to say, if there's an imminent threat or danger, that the mind will prioritize escaping that before it thinks about moving towards something important or valued. While it makes complete sense for our mind to prioritize escaping what is dangerous over pursuing what is important in a threatening situation, in other words, in a literally threatening situation, it doesn't make as much sense in the internal world. Let's open that up. So the mind doesn't distinguish very well between external threats like crocodiles or snakes or fires or wells and internal threats. Internal threats may be things like a fear of judgment or criticism, a fear of letting people down or being rejected. Internal threats may simply be feelings like anxiety and sadness, vulnerability, or even things like uncertainty, unpredictability, uncontrollability. All of these things may be internal threats that we've learnt to avoid. The problem is that the mind setting to override towards moves and prioritize away moves means that in the presence of any of these internal threats, we still seek to avoid them before we start to move towards what matters in life. If it were possible to actually escape them, there'd probably not be a huge problem with prioritizing that. But here's the catch, is that all the things we might do to try and escape or avoid these uncomfortable feelings never actually work to escape them for good. Would you agree? I mean, think about something like uncertainty or a fear of judgment. We might avoid a fear of judgment by not going to a social gathering. We might avoid unpredictability by researching something and scrolling through all the information we can get to understand it as much as we can. But what we know is that the next social gathering or the next challenge that we face, that these feelings might arise again. If our only way of handling uncertainty or fear of judgment is to avoid it or escape it, we spend a significant proportion of our life trying to avoid what we fear rather than pursue what we value, love, and care about. The reality is, avoiding what we don't want doesn't produce what we do want. Avoiding wells doesn't produce fruit. Trying to eliminate darkness doesn't produce light. And escaping the feelings that we fear doesn't produce the life that we want. The Harvest Clinic name itself was built on the idea that good mental health means so much more than the escape or avoidance of painful emotions. A lot of psychologists today are being trained in models and approaches that seek to reduce symptoms, in other words, reduce difficult feelings. But what we believe as a clinic is that a rich and full life comes with a rich and full range of emotions. And so if we want to live a rich and full life, then we need to learn a different way to handle internal wells, in other words, these experiences, other than simply trying to escape them. Because like we said, one, we never really escape them, and two, the more we try to escape them, the smaller our life becomes and the less time we have to pursue the things that actually matter. So the concept of harvest is built on the idea that rather than helping people feel less bad, we want to produce more rich fruit in people's lives. And so if it would be helpful, I would love to invite you to connect with some of our team who are passionate about helping people define what is the fruit to move towards in life and learn ways to handle these internal wells like anxiety, self-doubt, fears of uncertainty, or vulnerability, to learn to handle those experiences so that we don't naturally prioritize them over and above pursuing what matters in life. I hope that this year will be a year where by the end of 2026, you can see even small successions towards the values that matter most to you.